Amen. Thanks to Nate and the rest of the team for leading us in our singing this morning. You can take your Bibles and open to Psalm 46. Psalm 46. Martin Luther is rightly called the leader of the Protestant Reformation. Luther's message and stance in opposition to the Catholic Church is well known. He wrote many works. He delivered many powerful lines. He's often quoted for his sharp and witty language. He's known for communicating, generally speaking, as directly and bluntly as possible. And yet, despite a wealth of incredible lines from the pen of Martin Luther, there is one surprising work of his pen that is quoted more than, I think, every other word of Luther combined. And that is these words: "A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. Our helper, he, amid the flood of mortal ills prevailing. For still our ancient foe doth seek to work us woe. His craft and power are great, and armed with cruel hate, on earth is not his equal." That is the hymn, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." Luther penned the words to this hymn around 1520, and it quickly became a central song for the Protestant Reformation. In fact, it's become known as the battle hymn of the Reformation. For those who were persecuted, this hymn was a source of strength. For martyrs, this hymn became a refrain of comfort and confidence. And this hymn spread with the Reformation. It's been translated into hundreds of languages. And for 500 years, the church has continued to repeat with Luther and proclaim the words, "A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark, a defense that never fails." Now, that hymn was Luther's rephrasing of a psalm that he held dear to his heart. And that is Psalm 46. This was the song that Luther clung to in times of trouble. And the Reformation was certainly a time of trouble. The Reformation was a dangerous time for the Reformers, a heavy time for men like Luther. And when he was especially discouraged, he is known to have looked to his co-worker, Philip Melanchthon, and say, "Come, Philip, let's sing the 46th Psalm." Now, why was this psalm so special to Luther? The answer is because it reminds us that God is with us, that he is our strong defender, and that because that is true, that we have nothing to fear. The message of Psalm 46 is that God is with his people and that he is powerful to protect them. I'm going to read the entirety of the psalm, and then we'll walk through it together. Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her, and she shall not be moved. God will help her when the morning dawns. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, and the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars to cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. The central message of Psalm 46 is not hard to identify. It's repeated throughout the psalm in verse 1, verse 7, and verse 11. The same concepts are repeated again and again through this psalm. Again, it begins in verse 1. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Look down at verse 7. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Look at verse 11. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Those are summative statements that give us the essence of this psalm. Let's break down what those three verses are saying just to understand the central message of this psalm, and then we'll walk through the whole thing. He begins by saying, God is our refuge. A refuge is a safe shelter, a place one would go for protection, a defense that opponents cannot conquer. It's a place where someone doesn't need to be concerned. It's a place of safety. It's a fortress. God is our refuge. He is also labeled as our strength. This references God's ability to empower his people to do what is right. Now, this is an amazing statement that's easy to gloss over, but again, the psalmist says, God is our refuge and our strength. He is our strength. The child of God has quite literally supernatural strength flowing through them. Supernatural strength brings many pop culture references to mind. The entire superhero universe has raked in billions of dollars built around men and women who are given otherworldly strength. But true otherworldly strength is actually described in this text. True otherworldly strength doesn't manifest itself in flying or in feats of muscular strength. True supernatural strength is the God-given ability to act righteously in the face of troubles. It's the ability to act righteously in the face of troubles. And God gives his people the ability to do that. He is our strength. The psalmist continues, he is a very present help in trouble. A very present help in trouble. God helps his people. We are not alone. God is not just a help, he is a present help. Look again at the end of verse 1. A very present help in trouble. He does not just help from afar. Perhaps you've endured a tragedy in your life. What do you expect from those closest relationships that you have during those times? Well, one thing that I think we all expect is that we expect those that love us most to just be there, to help, to care enough to be involved, to shoulder the weight alongside of us. This text says that God is a very present help in the face of trouble. Verse 1 makes the theological assertion that will carry us through this psalm, and that assertion is this, that God is a powerful, protecting presence. This psalm centers on God's powerful, protecting presence. It's initiated in verse 1, and then it's repeated in verses 7 and 11. Look at verse 7. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. The Lord of hosts is with us. The Lord of hosts refers to the God of armies. It's a name for God that emphasizes his absolute power and might. The armies of heaven fall under his power. They are under his command. He's the Lord of hosts. He's the powerful God. But what makes that truth so important is not that he's an extremely powerful commander of armies. He is the Lord of hosts. But what brings that close to home is not just that he is the Lord of hosts, but watch this, that the Lord of hosts is with us. That's his presence. He is powerfully present. His power and his presence are affirmed there. The Lord of hosts is with us. He continues, the God of Jacob is our fortress. There's that stronghold terminology again. He protects. It's his protecting presence. God's powerful and protecting presence are repeated throughout this psalm. Now, why does this matter? Well, the psalmist is working off of a very important premise for the Christian life in this passage. And that premise is that theology directs action. Theology directs action. Let me say it another way. What you believe determines how you live. Now, we all, I think, inherently know this to be true. It's not even limited to matters of theology. If you believe that the world is ending tomorrow, you probably aren't saving for retirement today, because what you believe directs how you act. If you believe that the economy is about to crash, you're probably not putting a lot of money in stocks today, because what we believe determines how we act. It's important that we talk about this relationship between head knowledge and application. It's important that we recognize that head knowledge and application are not two very distinct categories. Head knowledge directly leads to application. The knowledge that this psalm centers on is God's powerful and protecting presence. That is a theological assertion. It's a biblical truth. God is a powerful, protecting presence. Now, that is head knowledge that we need to know. We need to affirm his powerful and protecting presence. But sometimes we're tempted to say that that's head knowledge, that's not really applicable, that doesn't really have anything to do with our lives. And this psalm shows us how that is faulty thinking. Because look at the first line of verse 2. After making that theological assertion, the psalmist's next statement is, therefore, we will not fear. The theology that is articulated in verse 1 leads directly to the conclusion that we don't need to fear. Why don't we need to fear? Because the statement in verse 1 is true. See the link between what we know and how we act. If we believe that God is a powerful and protecting presence, that drives us to the conclusion that we don't need to fear. Knowledge and application are inextricably linked. What is the natural application from the truth of God's powerful and protecting presence? We don't need to fear. Therefore, we will not fear. That's an impressive claim from the psalmist. Therefore, we will not fear. That isn't some unique term with an unexpected meaning. The term fear here literally means to be afraid. The psalmist says, God is a powerful and protecting presence, therefore we don't need to be afraid. And that may feel to you like a little bit of an overstatement. Certainly there are things in life that can rightly be feared. Well, that's exactly where this psalm heads next. It goes into examples of things that we don't need to fear because God is a powerful and protecting presence. These examples illustrate that God's powerful protecting presence means that we don't need to fear in any circumstance. So as we break down this psalm, our outline for this morning is going to be two scenarios in which God's powerful protecting presence comforts his people. Two scenarios in which God's powerful protecting presence comforts his people. The first scenario where Psalm 46 shows this, number one, is natural disasters. Natural disasters. It's shown in verses 2 through 5. Here the psalmist begins to illustrate a scenario that would normally, in any rational person, produce fear. But because of God's powerful protecting presence, this psalm is going to say, even in the face of that, we need not fear. So he starts in verse 2 by giving an example of fear-inducing chaos in nature. Look at verse 2. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. He just gave 4 descriptors of what we could label natural disasters. Some have observed that these 4 things combined sound a lot like a catastrophic earthquake, and that's certainly possible. It's not the only interpretation of those things, but it's possible. Regardless, these 4 come together to express four terrifying events in nature. Terrifying events in nature. Break them down again, beginning of verse 2. We will not fear, though the earth gives way. That is literally the ground beneath your feet, it starts to change. It starts to break apart. It starts to no longer be what it once was. Be a terrifying moment. He continues to describe more terrifying scenarios. Though the mountains fall into the ocean, said literally here, the mountains are moved into the heart of the sea. What a vivid picture. What a vivid picture. Of all parts of nature, mountains are considered to be the most secure and immovable. No one can move a mountain. But the psalmist says, if the mountains are just slipping into the ocean, we will not fear. It's a stunning statement. He continues to describe waters that rage. Beginning of verse 3, though it, that is the seas, waters roar and foam, roaring waters, raging waters. No one on earth takes raging waters lightly. Even the most confident and capable sailors on earth seek to avoid dangerous storms. Tidal waves are one of the most destructive forces known to man. And in the Bible, the sea, the ocean, is often painted as a symbol of chaos. So when it roars and when it rages, it is certainly a natural cause for fear. The psalmist continues, the end of verse 3, though the mountains tremble at their swelling. Again, he returns to the mountains. They're shaking. They're moving. They're seemingly ready to burst. Now, anyone caught in the midst of these types of circumstances, I think we could say, has every right to be fearful. But remember where we started. Remember how verse 2 starts. The statement that precedes those four scenes, the statement that precedes it is, we will not fear though these happen. It's a stunning statement. And don't remove it from the theology of verse number 1. Why will we not fear? Because of God's powerful and protecting presence. In the face of natural disaster, the one who trusts God can rest assured, even though the earth may be crumbling, God is with us. Even though there are terrifying events all around, He is strong, and He is our strength and our refuge. If the one who made the mountains and the sea and the earth is our ever-present help, then we need not fear the mountains or the sea or the earth. The psalmist continues with more statements of truth that help to motivate the commitment to not fear in the face of natural disaster. Now, as we get into verses 4 and 5, I want to acknowledge something here. No one really agrees on exactly how to break up Psalm 46. It's a difficult psalm to outline. There's pretty universal general agreement that this song has two main points, and that is what we're talking about right now, natural disaster, and then what's coming, what we'll see in a few minutes, is national disaster. We'll get there in a few minutes, and everyone kind of agrees that those two things are both communicated in this psalm, but there's difficulty in knowing what exactly to do with verses 4 and 5. Do they belong in the natural disaster or the national disaster category? And perhaps this is a cop-out, but I think the answer is both. So as we look at verses 4 and 5, I don't normally do this in my outline, but you see in my outline this morning that there's overlap between verses 4 and 5. We're going to apply those to both the natural and the national disasters as we work through these. Verses 4 and 5. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her, and she will not be moved. I don't think that the psalmist is done talking about nature here, but he does stop talking about turbulent nature. He's just said, if the mountains fall into the sea, and if the waters roar and foam, and if the mountains shake, and now he gives a reminder of God's provision in nature. He speaks of a river. He speaks of a river in the city of God that makes its inhabitants rejoice. It makes them glad. He speaks of this place as the place where God dwells. In the face of natural disasters, the psalm reminds us that there is a calm river that functions as a key reminder to God's people. Now, the city that's being referenced in verse 5, look again, there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God. That city, the city of God, is the city of Jerusalem. And the river that's in the city of Jerusalem is the waters that flow from the spring of Gihon. Now, a river is generally seen as a calming presence. You may have pictures in your home with rivers or streams or brooks because there are peaceful connotations that come with a river. But a river is not only a calming presence, it is a source of life. It's a source that is essential for a city's existence. Cities generally find their existence rooted in the presence of water. Rivers are lifeblood of significant cities. Seattle was placed around strategic rivers. Kansas City, where I've just moved from, is strategically placed at the convergence of two rivers. If those rivers ceased to exist, the city itself would have been in jeopardy. The psalmist is pointing to a similar reality in Jerusalem. The spring of Gihon constantly supplied water to the city of God. It was critical to the existence of Jerusalem. And so God's special relationship with the Israelites and specifically with the city of Jerusalem reassured them that while the earth may crumble around them, God has uniquely provided for his people. He is with them and he protects them. Look at verse 5. God is in the midst of her, and she will not be moved. God will help her when the morning dawns. The city of God's not going to be moved. Back in verse 2, the natural disasters were described as moving the earth. Here the psalmist says, the earth may move, but God's city will not. It's the exact same terminology. So he says, waters may rage, mountains may crumble, the earth may give way, but our river still flows. God continues to provide for his people, and he will not abandon them. Now, to rightly understand the encouraging nature of these verses, we need to enter into the mind of the original audience to the best of our ability here. Jerusalem was the central city for God's people, for the Israelites. This is Mount Zion. This is the city of God. This is the location of the temple. This is the location of David's throne, where the earthly king will one day reign. The heavenly king will one day reign on earth. God's presence with his people, don't misunderstand. God's presence with his people is not isolated to Jerusalem. But Jerusalem was the climactic location of God's presence. The Jews would have understood God's presence as just climactically present in that particular city. Elsewhere, the psalmist would acknowledge that there's nowhere that we can go from the presence of God. The presence of God is not locationally based, it's relationally based. So, what is the psalmist getting at here? Thus far in this psalm, what he has told us is that there is no reason to fear natural disasters because God is our refuge and our strength. And then he says, take for example, his city. The earth may move, but God has a plan for that city. The mountains may fall into the sea, but God's city will not. The specific statements of these verses are very cultural, but the principles behind them are so universally applicable to us. The message is to embrace that God is with us, that he will not abandon us. He will give us what we need even in the face of natural disaster. So when tragedy strikes in the form of a storm or a fire or a flood or a hurricane or a tornado or famine or sickness, we need not fear because God is with us. He is a powerful, protecting presence. That brings us to a second scenario. The first scenario, in which his powerful, protecting presence comforts his people, is natural disasters. The second scenario for us this morning is national disasters. national disasters. And again, I'm intentionally overlapping verses 4 and 5 here because they carry both themes of both natural and national. So not only does the city of God illustrate security in the face of natural disasters, but also in the face of national disasters. Once again, he begins with an example of fear-inducing chaos. Chaos that reasonably would cause fear. The psalmist has introduced God's city, which will not be moved, whom God helps, which would surely bring to mind for God's people the threat of Israel's national enemies, those who may attack the city of God and the people within it. So look at verse 6. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, and the earth melts. The terminology of verse 6 is terminology of warfare. Nations are fighting. They are in an uproar. Another term here is that the nations are raging. It's actually the same term that described the waters back in verse 2. As waters rage, as waves collide, that same word describes nations here. They're raging, they're colliding, they're crashing together. The nations are colliding in a national tempest. The psalmist says that kingdoms are tottering. Kingdoms are just falling over. It's the same word that was used to describe the mountains back in verse 1. Mountains are falling into the ocean. Nations are just toppling over. This describes the chaotic destruction of cities. Perhaps you've played Jenga when the tower is swaying and it's barely holding on and it looks like it's just about to go. That's how whole nations are described here. Like they're just teetering on the brink of falling over. These are national disasters. Nation attacking nation. People groups hating other people groups. Attacking, fighting, destroying. And Israel was no stranger to this. She had her fair share of enemies, seemingly always posing a threat to God's people. And so as the nations raged, it was reasonable and normal for the Israelites to fear. At any given point, they felt like they were on the brink of being wiped out like countless other nations. Certainly, fear in the face of destruction is a natural emotion. But once again, one's theology corrects that response. Even in the face of warfare, the psalmist gives a potent reminder that God has all power. Look again at verse 6. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter, but he utters his voice and the earth melts. He utters his voice and the earth melts. In an incredible example of just how powerful God is, the psalmist reminds us that while the nations may rage, our God has a voice that can melt the earth. We serve a God with an earth-melting voice. Natural disasters may cause the earth to move. God's mere voice can cause it to melt away. And the point is this: raging nations are no threat to God's power. If he raises his voice, they will no longer be threatened by each other, but by him. He reminds Israel that the all-powerful God is with them. Nations are often competing against one another to have superior weapons. Consider, for example, the nuclear arms race of the Cold War. The U.S. and Soviet Union pursuing the upper hand in nuclear warfare. The nation with the most military power has the authority and less reason to fear. Well, the psalmist reassures the Israelites that they have the greatest military power imaginable on their side. There is one far more powerful than the raging nations. They may topple kingdoms, but a word from God can melt them, can dissolve them. Now, the notion of an earth-melting God in the face of raging nations isn't necessarily good news. That phrase by itself is just another terrifying threat. Like, nations are toppling. There's an earth-melting God. The situation just got from bad to worse, except when you look at verse 7, the God whose voice can melt the earth is said to be with us. That God, verse 7, the Lord of hosts, the Lord with the earth-melting voice, that God is with us. That's his presence. He's with us. The earth-melting God, the Lord of hosts, is not a threat to his people. He is with his people. So God's people can rejoice. They can take comfort. The God of all power is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress, verse 7 says. In the face of national disasters, even then, as counterintuitive as it sounds, even then, we need not fear because the one with all power is on our side. In verses 8 and 9, he then calls them to remember how God has demonstrated that power historically. Verses 8 and 9. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars to cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. The psalmist says, just observe what the Lord has done. Come and look at how he has conducted himself in the past. He's destroyed our enemies before. He's calling the Israelites to think back on how God has protected his people historically. The psalmist is saying, this powerful God, he's protected us from the Egyptians. He's driven out the Canaanites before us. He's delivered us from the Philistines. He's wiped out armies. He's made wars stop. He renders bows and spears and chariots worthless. God protects his people. They are not at the mercy of their opponents. They are in the hands of God. And their opponents, who may be raging, who may be toppling kingdoms, they too stand at the mercy of the all-powerful one. We may not feel this threat with quite the same level of closeness that the Israelites did, but the reality of raging nations is not foreign to us. It is natural to fear the seemingly growing tension across the planet, to fear the potential for nuclear war, for the rise of evil powers, to worry about what the world is going to look like in the next 20 years, to be concerned about the political scene, to fear that the country that you grew up with is not the country on the horizon. Every one of those may happen. But we need not fear, because the all-powerful God is present with his people. Nations may rage. Kings may beat their chest. Kingdoms may fall. But God is strong, and he's with us. And if that's true, and it is, then we have nothing to fear. The psalmist brings his argument to a climax in verses 10 and 11. This is the closing bracket of this psalm. In light of God's attributes that are declared in this psalm, his powerful and protecting presence, look at verse 10. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The psalmist says, be still. That word, that original Hebrew, the word is simply just stop. Cease. Be still. In the face of impending doom, in the face of horrific fears, in the face of disasters, stop fretting, stop fearing, stop scrambling. But the command is not just to stop. The command is not just to stop. The command is not just to be actionless. The command is to replace this scrambling fear that comes naturally to all of us with a biblical response. What is the biblical response? Verse 10 says, know that I am God. Know that I am God. This is fascinating, and it connects to what we talked about earlier with head knowledge and application. The command here, the application, is to know something. It's to know something. What is the biblical response? To know that He is God. And that truth is so important to us navigating life's difficulties. If you fear earth's calamities, which is natural to me, it's natural to all of us. This text corrects us and says, you're misinformed. We're forgetting something. We've left an essential piece of information out of the puzzle as we process the world's events. As the antidote to a fearful response, God says, stop and think about this truth. Stop and meditate on who I am. There are many attributes and characteristics of God that produce comfort in fearful scenarios. But the psalmist encourages us to think very big in these moments. I think what he tells us to know, what he tells us to think about is fascinating. He says to stop and think about, I'll phrase it this way, stop and think about the godness of God. Stop and think about the godness of God. God says, stop and know I am God. So let's stop in the midst of fearful circumstances and remember and preach to ourselves, He's God. He's not a man. He's on the throne. He is the ultimate authority. God says, rest assured in the fact that I hold all authority. I rule the earth. Rest assured that I am God. Then because He is God, He can assure His people of the outcome of all disastrous situations. Look at the second half of verse 10. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. God says, stop and remember that I'm God, and remember that I will be exalted. I will be glorified. The things that you're seeing, these things do not undermine my plan. These things that cause you to fear, they don't stop me. They don't slow me down. I'm God and I will be exalted. I will not be overcome. God says, I will win. I will reign victorious over these things. He says, I'll be exalted, again in verse 10, I'll be exalted above the nations. That's national disaster. And he says, I'll be exalted above the earth. That's natural disaster. No matter what comes, I'm above it all and my name will be glorified. The outcome is secure. God will be exalted. Now, to know that outcome, and yet to fret and to fear is at the pathway to which we get to that outcome. Let's recognize the foolishness of that. If I know that He's going to be exalted through it all, if I know that He's going to be glorified, and yet I'm fretting and I'm fearful at the way that we're going to get there, it's foolishness. And it's in my heart, it's in all of our hearts, but it's foolishness. To know the outcome and yet to fret at the pathway is foolishness. I hesitate to tell you this story, but I'm going to do it, and I hesitate because I don't want you all to look down on me. But I love college football. It's one of my favorite times of year. I love college football, and there's a particular team that I was born in Ohio, so my particular team that we follow is Ohio State. And let me just put it this way. I like it enough that I'll watch reruns every once in a while, okay? I like it enough that I'll watch reruns. There was a time when I was watching a game that had played out 3 months ago. It was the Rose Bowl. It was a great game. Midway through the third quarter in this exciting and traumatic game, the star running back went down. The star running back went down with an injury. Now, I had just seen this game play out 3 months ago. I knew it well. Ohio State won this game in the final minutes. The running back that went down actually comes back into the game and scores, and I knew all of this. I knew that person that just got injured in this rerun that I was watching, that he was fine, that he was going to come back, and that Ohio State was going to win this game. And yet, in the rerun, when he got hurt, my genuine response was, oh no. And my wife is laughing at me and losing respect for me as I'm fretting over a game that is already won. Now, again, I hesitate to say that because I don't want you to judge me too hard, but before you judge me too hard, is that not what we do when we fear life circumstances? The outcome is secure. The game is won. So stop and remember, He is God and He will be exalted. That end, that result cannot be avoided. It is certain because He is God. And so the psalmist concludes with a repetition of the central claim of this psalm. Look at verse 11. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. The Lord of hosts, the all-powerful God, He is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. He's our defense. He's our protector. He's our strength. He is our strong tower. So in times of trouble, rehearse God's powerful and protecting presence. Remember it. Keep reminding yourself of it because theology directs practice. What we believe directs how we live, and bad theology creeps in so easily for all of us. In times of trouble, rehearse God's powerful, protecting presence. Also, in times of trouble, let's just remember the nature of fear. He says here that if you're fearing, you've forgotten something, because he says fear's going to come, but you need to be still and know. So when we're fearing, we've forgotten something. Fear stems from poor thinking. Fear is uninformed. Fear is irrational if we believe the statements of verse 10. In times of trouble, remember that God will be exalted. Remember not only that God is with us in this moment, remember the ultimate outcome. Remember that God says, I'm God and my purpose is not thwarted. When the world is crumbling, remember verse 10, I am God and I will be exalted. When everything is breaking, God will be exalted. When things get scary, God will be exalted. And if your life is threatened, God will be exalted. And if disease dominates the planet, He will be exalted. And if nations are running rampant in warfare, He will be exalted. And if mountains fall into the sea, He will be exalted. God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear. We will be still and we will know. We will rest. We will be comforted in the fact that He is God. Father, help us to take comfort in who You are, in Your faithfulness that has been demonstrated throughout history, that You look out for the good of Your people, that You care for us, that You know our every thought, You know our fears. You know our tendency to forget who You are as there are natural and national disasters. So Father, help our theology to direct how we live. Help us in times of difficulty and in trial to know that you're on the throne, that you're God, and that you will be exalted. Thank you for this reminder. Keep our eyes fixed on it in the midst of trouble. It's in Jesus' name that we pray, amen.